Paul stood on a hill called the Areopagus. He looked at the crowd and said, "I see you are very religious. I even found an altar with the words, 'To an unknown God' written on it. I have come to tell you who that God really is." He told them that God made the whole world and everything in it. After Athens, Paul went to the city of Corinth. There, he met a kind woman named Priscilla. She and her husband were followers of Jesus too. Paul stayed with them, and they became great friends. Priscilla was happy to have Paul in her home so they could talk about the good news of Jesus every day. Paul didn't just preach, he also worked hard. He and his friend Aquila were tent makers. They spent their days cutting and sewing heavy leather and cloth to make tents for travelers. While they worked with their needles and thread, they talked to everyone who passed by about the love of God. Next, Paul traveled to Ephesus. He stayed there for a long time, teaching and helping people, but not everyone was happy. A silversmith named Demetrius watched Paul from the shadows. Demetrius made money by selling little silver statues of a false goddess, and he was worried Paul's teaching would ruin his business. Demetrius gathered all the other craftsmen together. "This man Paul is telling people that gods made by hands are not gods at all," he shouted. Soon, the whole city was in an uproar. Demetrius and his friend led a giant crowd into a stadium, shouting and causing a great commotion because they were so upset. Paul traveled on to a place called Troas. One night, he spoke to the believers until very late. A young man named Eutychus sat in a window to listen. Because the room was warm and Paul talked for a long time, Eutychus fell fast asleep and tumbled right out of the third-story window. Everyone rushed downstairs, but Paul told them not to worry. Through God's power, Eutychus was alive and well. Later, Paul had to say goodbye to his friends. He met with his friend Luke on the beach. They prayed together and hugged, knowing that Paul had to travel to Jerusalem, even though it might be dangerous. When Paul arrived in Jerusalem, just as he had been warned, some people started trouble. A riot broke out at the temple, and Roman soldiers had to step in. A soldier grabbed Paul's arm to pull him away from the angry crowd. Paul remained calm, knowing
When you
that
are
God was
anchored in
with him,
Christ,
even when
a
things were
crisis is
scary.
never a place to panic. It is
Paul
the
asked the
ultimate
soldier
platform
if he
to
could
share
speak
your
to the
story.
people. He stood on the stairs and raised his hand. The noisy crowd went silent. Paul began to tell them his whole story, how he used to be an enemy of Jesus, but how God had changed his heart. Paul was a prisoner, but he was happy to share his faith.